So today we're going to talk about the difference between a data analyst and a business analyst in theory, and then actually what happens when you're working inside the field. Because I've held both positions, I've had both titles: data analyst, business analyst, senior business analyst, also been promoted as a data analyst too, in a variety of different companies. And I'll share my own experience because it's a little bit different from what you would expect. And then dive into, in theory, what each role should be technically, and then what I actually did in both of those roles, and then the one question that tells you which one you should target. And my name is Jeff. I first became a data analyst nearly 15 years ago. Now I'm a business analyst consultant at a Fortune 10 company, at one of the top healthcare companies. So I've had the whole career path of these different roles. I went from a data analyst to data analyst two, business analyst, senior business analyst, to a business analyst consultant. And I've sat on hiring panels and been the lead technical person on a variety of different teams. So I can tell you what, in my own experience, for all of the different roles, what they entail and what other people are doing as well. So first, let's talk about what is a data analyst supposed to do. The textbook's definition is you analyze data, you collect, you clean data, you analyze it. You're going to build dashboards, reports, and then you're usually going to use SQL, Excel, and BI tools to answer business questions. You're usually going to be pulling data mining for whatever the business needs to get insights so that they can make better decisions. That's true in definition. So when I first became a data analyst nearly 15 years ago, I'm dating myself, I was supporting Medicare Part D. I would be pulling the data. I'd be looking at the improvement metrics that we would be submitting to health plans to basically improve our performance bonuses that we would be getting. So just driving more revenue to the company. What this would entail would be me building different databases. Back then, it would be through Access, but it would be connecting to our data warehouse where I would pull the data needed. This is where I would learn a lot more complex joins. I would learn a lot more about cleaning, a lot more about grain, even though I didn't know the concept, and data validations based on a variety of different users, especially because it was at a small to mid-sized company. I would get questions from everyone, from providers to our COO to our department director to provider relations, to get the data and provide it to all the various sources that I had to deliver to. What the typical request would just be, why is this number off? Can you pull this data for me? That was basically the request. And then it would just be consistent pulls for all of the reporting needs that we had. I was building and pulling data and creating a bunch of reports that was needed by our department director. And I was helping out our department director in all the process improvements and basically just getting more reimbursement and then figuring out ways to get better accuracy out of our data, because the more accurate that we can provide to our providers and everyone in our network, and then ultimately give it to the health plans, the better outcomes that we get, patient outcomes on top of our quality outcomes, which ultimately also lead to incentives by the health plans. And inside this role as a data analyst, and when I became a data analyst too, my director at the time didn't like presenting in front of people. And we had this massive quarterly summit that where everyone would present their incentive, their quality improvement to the whole group. So it was the corporate company and then all the subdivisions, and everyone would come there. So it would be COOs, CFOs, medical directors, and then it would be our department. So then we would go, and that was the time where I had real experience presenting at like a nice hotel in front of all of these executives of what we were doing. So presenting the data and answering questions, because my boss at the time didn't like presenting. She was a great boss for everything else. She just didn't have the public speaking because she just didn't like doing it. So it got offloaded to me, which I enjoy doing it. And it gave me a lot of experience working and talking and knowing what to expect when getting grilled by stakeholders, because we were one of the lower teams, and they were always grilling us on how our process improvements and like how we're gonna grow CMS stars and a risk adjustment and what are we doing currently. So then they would just ask us, and then we would present, and that really taught me about how to deal with stakeholders and also the expectations about going into a meeting to make sure that I was prepared. So let's talk about the textbook definition for what a business analyst is supposed to do. It bridges the business to IT. So you gather requirements. So this could be for anything. This could be for a new enhancement. This could be for a new application. This could be new changes to data pipelines, to processes that are coming down the pipeline to improve or meet a new goal, company initiative. Then you work with IT, they're the ones who handle the technical specifications and the actual delivery and execution. And then you're there as a business analyst, getting the different requirements, the needs, the features from the users, and then translating to what that means to IT so that they can deliver on what is required. So then you map the processes, you're tied to process improvement, and then you translate the stakeholder needs into documentations and to solutions that IT builds. So here's what changed when I went from a data analyst two to a business analyst. What actually changed, you would think that I wouldn't be as technical and I would shift to working with stakeholders more in process improvement, but that was far from the truth. I started working more with stakeholders on a daily basis through virtual meetings, but I became significantly more technical. I was brought in specifically for automations because of all my previous experience in Access and doing a lot of different automations in there. I was brought to do that. And then also my process improvement experience, they brought me in so that I can bridge those skills and improve several processes that they had inside the company because it was on legacy systems and a lot of it was built in Access. So then they brought me in to automate a lot more of the work. And on top of that, the senior analyst at the time was a wizard with VBA. And prior to that, I did no coding. I was just doing everything in Access. I was doing everything inside the UI. I had no idea the power of VBA and the power of coding within all these applications, and that you could build a full application with users that do everything that you need it to do with low cost. It's basically just the user's computer and laptop that's supporting it in memory. And then as long as the data isn't too big, which you could also offload to SQL Server for any of like the heavy computational stuff, you could build powerful applications. And that's ultimately what I ended up doing. So I wouldn't be the ones who would be gathering the requirements because we had project managers on the team. What I would be doing was I would be going to the different people on our team and then I would be looking at all of the different processes. Then I'd be brought in. Can we automate this? Can we work with this? I'd work with pharmacists on other teams with their manual processes and the data that they're working with, and then help them clean it up, help them automate different parts, and then use VBA to create applications. I create the front end with forms and then a lot of the data manipulations. When I went and became a business analyst, I was surprised that there was no clean data warehouse for me to pull because I was used to that as a data analyst. Now, because there are a variety of different sources that we have to pull from, and they're not always cleanly loaded anywhere, we had to support our own loading processes and cleaning and ETL process, extract, transform, and load processes. So we were creating our own ETL processes and data pipelines to pull the data that we needed from a variety of different sources, from websites, from CMS to internal reports and text files, and then bring it into a database, manipulate it into what we need, and then create the final deliverables. So as a business analyst, a senior business analyst, and then eventually a business analyst consultant where I am today, I acted more like a one-man dev shop that was doing the business analyst work. I work with the stakeholders on what they needed and the process improvement initiatives and time savings initiatives. They would bring me in. I'd look at all the different processes. I'd gather the requirements as if I were the business analyst. Then I would be the one, instead of IT, doing all of the solutioning and then working in the UAT, the user acceptance testing, to make sure that it's functioning as it should, and then tracking all of the time savings. And then I was the developer, the engineer. I would engineer different data pipelines depending on the data that would be needed. And if we had access to the data, could I pull it from different places, different data warehouses later, APIs? And I ultimately became significantly more technical. So the real difference between a data analyst and a business analyst, in theory, is supposed to be proximity to the data, or in theory. The data analyst sits closer to the data. The business analyst sits closer to the business decisions. The data analyst is supposed to answer, what does this data say? The BA is supposed to answer what we should do about it and help making the decisions. The uncomfortable truth is, though, a lot of companies, these titles are interchangeable. They're also inconsistent, and they could also be based on politics. Because if you see my own experience, sometimes as a business analyst consultant right now, I act more as a data engineer, as an AI engineer, and I'm building full applications. So in theory, I'm also kind of like a software engineer building all of these data pipelines and applications on the business side for users. And I'm now on the analytics team, so I'm technically an IT team that is on the business side that can move and become more agile. But if you were to bring me over into a different company, I would be under a different title. I could be under data engineer. I could be under software engineer, to be honest, and a lot of variety of different things. So when you're looking for the differences, you need to look more at the jobs and the responsibilities and the skills required when you're looking at your job descriptions rather than just the business titles because they vary from company. And even the different data analysts and the business analysts that I work with at my current company and with all the different divisions and different departments and different segments, it depends on your manager, it depends on your department, it depends on your VP and the need of your team because the need of your team is going to trump everything else. And when they find out that you're skilled, when you have technical skills, they're going to leverage your strengths and your weaknesses. They had me grow into this lane, especially since the senior business analyst, at least one of them, was already in that lane and he mentored me. And then so I became more technical and then I eventually went on to a more technical analytics team. So here's the one question. When someone hands you a messy problem, what gives you more energy? Finding the answer or defining the question? If finding the answer, then in theory, it's going to be data analyst. If it's defining the questions and the requirements around it, then you would want to be a business analyst. Again, it's all loose and it all changes. And even within the same company, it's inconsistent. So just look at what you ideally want to do and just make sure that it's in the requirements and the responsibilities within the jobs that you're applying for. And if you have any further questions on the different definitions of data analyst versus business analyst, feel free to leave in the comments below. And then until then, query responsibly and watch this next video.